In the intervening break that we were having, we as a group were deciding about how do we sort of take the discussion ahead so that it doesn't become very repetitive, and we come out with some insights in a very short time that we have for such a very vast topic that is placed between us. The rules, I as a moderator am taking the liberty to set out for this panel is we'll take a very short 1-minute introduction each for all the speakers. After which, I have a few set of questions ready to be shot at different speakers individually, which they'll answer individually, and then we'll have a collective discussion on that. Post which, maybe at the end of the session for another 10 to 15 minutes, we'll open it up to the audience to ask any of the panel members on what their thoughts are and what the queries are. So I'll start with Shirish here to introduce himself, and then go one speaker after the other.
Hi, I'm CEO for Voltas Clover. I've been with Voltas Clover for 1 year. Before that, I spent like 16 years with GE in the healthcare division, so I consider that as my alma mater. Voltas Clover is, like to describe it as a 174-year-old startup. As you could imagine, information services back there in 100 years ago was more in publishing and documents and journals. Over the last 10 years, our organization has transformed, where now 85% of its revenues come from digital solutions, services, and apps. And we are into 4 verticals: healthcare, legal, accountancy, and risk and compliance.
Great, thanks, Shirish. Anurag?
Namaskar, my name is Anurag Dandia, and I don't like words like rules that Bipin used. So you can read my bio on the website. My focus has really been about humankind and about the impact of human capital development and how critical that is for especially the subcontinent at this moment. So.
Great. Thanks, Anurag. About myself, my name is Vipin. I lead an organization called Online Theory. My firm enables people from across India to do news reading, to prepare for different tests, to access knowledge and content for different examinations, for different skill-based jobs, which can help them improve their livelihood. On any given day, more than 3 lakh people across India use Online Theory to prepare, to gain knowledge, to read news, and do every other activity which can help them in some way or the other improve their livelihoods. Our team has been supported by a couple of very good investors, a couple of very good advisors from India and outside. Personally, about myself, I've been born, brought up, and done my studies in India. For a very brief time before starting Online Theory, I also advised the government on launching the entire National Digital Literacy Mission. I think it was someone in the last panel was also discussing about that briefly. And personally, as an individual, I am passionate about making a change in the way pedagogy, training, skill development happens in India. Would love to discuss with all the audience here when we meet up face-to-face. Thanks.
Hi all, Prachi Wendless. I am from the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation. I manage the education portfolio of the foundation. It's the Dell Family Foundation set up by Michael and his wife Susan. The mission of the foundation being transforming the lives of children living in urban poverty through education. In India, we invest in 3 areas in education, which is all the way from K-12 education, college entrance and college completion, skilling and vocational, and financial inclusion. Till date, have invested more than $120 million in education through grants, equity investments, and more recently through debts and fund structures. And about myself, I am an engineer, a consultant, management consultant, and now an impact investor. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Felix Ortiz from New York. I founded a technology company. We're venture-backed based in Palo Alto and New York City. And we believe in rebuilding and empowering the middle class. So we utilize data to match students to jobs within middle skill labor markets and entry-level positions. We work specifically with community colleges and vocational schools. Right now we're in the US and starting to penetrate Mexico. We're very interested in India, which is why I'm here. And a little bit of my background is I'm on the board of the New York City Technology Development Corporation. I'm also on Hillary's board policy advisory council for technology and entrepreneurship. So hopefully she wins.
Sure.
Many of us are hoping that.
Great. Thanks for the introduction, Felix. I'll start with my first question, and specifically to you, Anurag and Felix, because you have very interesting backgrounds here. So, Anurag, because you've been born, brought up here, but you're now in the US, and you help companies sort of create that manpower and help them empower their employees with better skill sets as well as give them better services. What are your insights on skill development, especially when we compare a US to an Indian market, and what are the learnings that we can get from there to India?
So, you know, I've spent the whole day here today listening to a lot of experts and global leaders from all over the world. And it kind of makes me sad that nobody brings up human capital and how important the development of that asset is. You know, we talk about R&D, we talk about startups, we talk about, but somehow this gets missed. You know, we started the entity that I founded 26 years ago in the US because I felt there was a massive deficit between the employer and the employee. Now, this word, the employee, I don't like either. So we try to push the word member, like a family member, if you will. The vision was aligning the mission and vision of the enterprise to the workforce that's bleeding for the brand on a daily basis, which directly relates and measures to profits. And we have measured that, and we have shown that to employers in 30 states in America over the last 2 decades. So, what was the question again, Vipin? I'm sorry.
So what we were looking to ask you, because of
Now,
your
how do you
industry-
shift that here?
That's right.
Well, the first thing that I would say is there must be a very transparent way to run enterprises. My family owns businesses in India, and profitability is not discussed openly. Forget about possibly giving any member equity of an enterprise. The other, you know, deficit that not many people like to talk about, frankly, is the basic respect factor. You know, you have owners of companies that have owned companies for 2 decades, 3 decades, possibly generations. And I've seen them walk through their building, straight to their office. Some are my family members, and they will not even acknowledge the presence of the person that's been there for 2 decades.
So what
You
you're
know?
saying is more active engagement with your employees, treating them as members of the family, and then also possibly leading to focusing the attention of the organization towards skill development, towards making their skill sets more oriented for the organization.
Vipin, this morning when Harjeev opened the conference, he said something very important. Education, the translation of education in Hindi is the word shiksha. Shiksha defines to learning. Unless startups and enterprises in the subcontinent and the South Pacific are not able to really identify a continuous learning and development process for their members, I mean the entire life cycle of the employee while the employee, the member, is within the enterprise, it's not going to pay dividends.
Sure.
So the learning must be consistent. I have learned so much today myself here. I encourage my team in the US to do the same thing.
Sure.
I encourage my team in Cyber City, Gurgaon to do the same thing. It's a continuous effort, but it requires investments.
Sure. Felix, what are your thoughts? Because your company, your venture is now looking at scaling across different countries. What do you think about skill development in these geographies?
Yeah, I mean, so we use data to match people to jobs. We believe that in the market, the underskilled, middle skilled labor market pool is overlooked. You have a lot of technologies that are attacking more the affluent, highly educated human capital markets, but there is no middle skill LinkedIn, if you think about it. So we believe that our technology will be the baby LinkedIn, which is actually much greater than LinkedIn.
Sure.
And we believe that it's important to validate and verify skills against the local skill deficiency needs of those employers. So the way that we look at it is that every country has a taxonomy. Every taxonomy has a stock code index. and every employer needs specific competencies and knowledge, skills, and ability, and they all have applicant tracking systems, at least the big guys do. And to a degree, they're not leveraging that data that they have in there. So by integrating into that data, you're able to source out what are their needs locally and then validate against what the skills acquired are the student within the local market. So that's why we think that the most important thing is not just understanding what the KSAs or competencies are of the employer, but what are the skills being acquired by the student. Also, we believe that the market is also shifting towards employers providing curriculum that will supersede colleges.
Sure.
We believe that GE, for example, and other employers will provide that content to a local college, and the student would have a credential that can then be aligned into that specific industry vertical.
Sure.
So whether it's GE or Siemens. So that's a little bit further out, but that's the way that we view it.
Great. Talking of intervention of technology for creation of content and dissemination of knowledge, Shirish, your company is into that. What are your thoughts on integration of technology towards skill development? Because you are doing that work with a lot of companies.
So let me start with first why this is important for India. If you look at, and the brief that we got, we're talking about Make in India. Now, Make in India, Skill India is a very big part of it. 8-9% GDP growth, at least half, 3/4 will come from agriculture, but the balance will come from secondary sectors like healthcare. And since, like I explained, that's a little closer to my heart, so let me talk about that. From healthcare standpoint, if you look at what is India facing today, is a big challenge. And the biggest challenge, I would say, is the lack of skilled manpower. And that's where it brings the question. And technology, I believe, can play a big role in improving the skills, not only from the student standpoint, but even doctors. And I'll like to give 2 examples for that. Starting with the student. If you look at any undergraduate medical student who is going through a college, the standard says for every student to understand the anatomy, 4 students to 1 cadaver. Cadaver means to understand the body, human body, dead body, you need 4 students and you need 1 body. In premier institutes in India, even in premier institutes, there are 40-50 students and you have only 1 cadaver. And that's, I'm talking government colleges. In the private colleges, there's nothing like that. Now, there is a technology called ACLAN, and in fact, Voltas Clover has that product, which gives you a 3-dimensional view of a cadaver in color, in human, where you can introduce that at this undergraduate level so that the students can learn, right? Obviously, it cannot replace cadaver, but it can be a big booster to the skill. The second example, which is more related to how we can have a continuous medical education in the healthcare space, research has proven that every doctor who's treating us faces at least 12 questions a day. So when he's treating his patient, every day he faces 12 questions. Majority of these questions actually go unanswered. So that means when he treats us with guesswork for those 12 questions. And there, again, technology can play a big role. In fact, now the answers can be available on smartphone. There's a tool called UpToDate, and in fact, we tried it up in Singapore National University, where the doctor, when he referred to this tool, when he faced that question, he changed his decision, he changed his diagnosis, he changed his treatment 37% of the time when he actually referred to a digital tool like that. So I think skill development, skill enhancement, technology can play a huge role in that.
What we understand from what you said, Shirish, is basically not just only in the post-job or in the upskilling segment can technology help, it can also help people or employees, potential employees, at the time that they are learning their curriculums, whether in medical schools or in companies.
Exactly.
Right? Prachi, you've been an investor, you've looked at different companies as an investor, as an advisor, as a consultant. How do you see the role of technology solving the problem, and do you think that skilling as a problem is big enough a problem for an investor to make a profitable business case out of?
So skilling as a problem for investors, let me just take that question first, because
Sure.
that's where we have not made money yet. So I can say, but we are still betting on it. And we are hoping that, given how large the problem is, not just, from our perspective being an impact investor, not just from the perspective of making money and getting, subnormal returns on that. I think just from the perspective of getting the innovation which exists in India, in our private sector, in social entrepreneurs, attracting that to the sector to solve the problem is probably a more important objective for us. So we've made several investments in skilling, ranging all the way from companies which are going and working in colleges to introduce job readiness skills in college students, to companies which are working on construction sites and skilling the construction workers. We still, I wouldn't say that, most of these are 2 to 3 year old investments. None of them have pivoted for us to make a point that, yes, we are sure that, this sector as a sector will make money for us. But coming back to your original question, the other part of your question around technology, yes, we're firm believers that, technology is the only way many of these problems will get solved. Not just the problems that we are talking in terms of skilling and, scaling of these solutions, but the problems that we look at in our broader education system. I mean, the innovation only goes that far once it's being administered through manual means, whatever they be, whether through a trainer or through a or through any of these offline means, but the potential that you can harness, the scale that you can reach with technology is huge. Sure. One of our companies, which is working in Bangalore, they have a solution where they're training workforces in jobs like mobile repair, computer repair, projector repair, and they cannot make those type of trainers available everywhere. So they use the satellite EduSat network being provided by the government to beam in very high quality trainers sitting in rural Karnataka with PC sets open in front of them or projectors open in front of them, and getting step by step training on how to use that. So in a day that solution gets scaled to thousands of thousands of youth and thousands of solutions. Similarly, the way many others are using technology for the purpose of tracking and the purpose of monitoring. Very recently, we worked with the government of Haryana, again in a very different context, in the context of school education, where once the technology solutions were deployed for the monitoring and academic monitoring as well as administrative monitoring of schools, we found that even the numbers of children were not the same. That there were 27 lakh children registered in the system, whereas there were only 23 lakh children in the system. So that the disruption that technology brings and the speed at which it brings is undeniable. But the way we look at it is that technology is the means to solve the problem. It's not an end in itself. That just because technology has come, we will have superior results. We have to keep an eye on the outcome that we are looking at, and if technology is getting us there, like someone was saying, better, cheaper, faster, that's definitely the way to go.
And because I think I'll just carry forward the thought, because you in your speech in your answer just sort of briefly talked about how mobiles are enabling people to sort of access different skill sets or access to different jobs. I, as an entrepreneur, can talk a bit about what we've seen in my company. The interesting thing is we are not very old as a startup. We just started around 2 years back. We started off as a very simple thought of enabling people to access knowledge on their mobile phones and in their own language. These were two things which were not yet tested in India. These were first in India, no other precedent there. When we talked to VCs, we talked to a couple of investors, advisors, they said, hey, boss, the market is too small, unorganized, maybe you go there are not enough people, how will you make money? This is not a game that is going to make any change in the skills of the guys. Don't go into it. 2 years down, the interesting insights that we've seen and the kind of ramp up in terms of number of guys that we've seen is there is a massive use of technology even by guys who we believe are the underprivileged guys. We have seen people, in fact, as I said, so we have 3 lakh people from the underprivileged community across India every single day using their mobile phones to enhance their skill sets, to upskill themselves. And they're doing different courses, including courses like how to create their resumes, how to use Word, how to use PowerPoint, how to talk in an interview, how to use English grammar, comprehension, every single thing. And these are things where we I think all of us as a speaker set, and I personally as an entrepreneur believe very passionately that technology is a very good, very excellent bridge that can be used to sort of upskill people across India. Coming to the next point, I think where all of us as a community, I think we have an excellent representation from the entrepreneurial community, from the investor side. What I don't see on this panel is, I don't see too many bureaucrats out here, I would have otherwise questioned them directly, is how do you, as an entrepreneur or as a leader, see the role of government in this? Do you see them as a good enough? Should they intervene as a regulator? Do you see them as a facilitator where they should themselves start facilitating some things? And Shirish, maybe I'll ask you first on that.
So, I have had good experience. I would say I've had, I'll qualify the word good. I've had experience with government. Just before I joined Wolters Kluwer for GE, I was heading the government business for the GE healthcare division. And my only thing is that it's only more on the conceptual side. Like, for example, we signed a big MOU with the Gujarat government to provide public-private partnership in the diagnostic centers in the government hospital. But the time it takes from conceptualization to implementation is just too long. And that, I think, in today's age is something which is deficient.
Sure.
And from a private company standpoint, I say, if this is such a big and difficult path to tread, why don't I go to the private sector, private customer base, because otherwise this one is too long and it's too slow. So I think that's what my perspective from as a CEO of a company, I would say.
Sure. How about you, Anurag? You've dealt with governments in India and I'm sure outside India, so many other different places. How do you compare the work and the involvement on different governments because of your multicultural different geography?
So between the US and India is your question? I can't say much about India because I left when I was very young. So that would be not a right thing to do. I have somebody that runs our India head office and he's responsible for that. But I do want to make a comment about the talk of government possibly trying to stop innovation and growth. Look, the government's job is to issue regulation, legislature, and compliance. And it is the entrepreneur's job to follow the rules, the law, and make money. So if the government is talked about as though are the ones stopping innovation, I don't agree with it.
Sure. Prachi, what are your thoughts? Because you are somewhere working with the government very closely.
So my answer is a strong yes. It's a very, very strong yes, whether it comes to skilling or it comes to education. I mean, I don't look at skilling and education as two separate areas, so I always speak about them in the same vein. So and a few ideas also where I think government can play a role even today without trying to either disrupt or to without. So I think sector skill councils, which was a very, very good effort started by NSTC, is still being done in many states, will actually to build to Felix's point, will just give a huge boost to the sector if we are able to set up these sector skill councils with the right set of power, with the right set of accreditation that they should be providing to the sector, with the right guidance that they can be providing, and not even work in silos as they are working today, but really today working and looking at the synergies of the entire ecosystem instead of just looking at the sector that they are looking at. So that is one area where the government can play a very strong role. Again, playing the role of a guide, setting the benchmark for quality and monitoring for that quality. The second role which they can play is very strongly of becoming that a platform. You were earlier talking about the platform weapon that you were trying to build for digital literacy. I mean, those type of platforms are not built by individual companies, are platforms which are bringing private sector together, funders and, many of these companies, because, there is just no one who has to benefit monetarily from such a large initiative, and these are very large initiatives. With so much activity happening, just getting those platforms together is another very big area where government can play a part. The third big area where they can play a part is in actually making financing available. NSTC has been one such initiative, but if you talk to any skilling company which is trying to work with the government, you'll see receivables financing is a huge issue which is coming up working with the government. So that is one direct area where government itself can start working in. When we look at our companies and we look at the students who are trying to pay for these solutions, right? Financing loans or vocation voucher programs or things like that, which are completely not prevalent in India, are again areas where the mainstream investors will not take the risk. Those products will not become available till some of the softer type of funding becomes available. So financing is another area where I think government can play a huge role. So I do see a lot of role coming that the government can come and play in this sector, building on to the innovation, the entrepreneurship that we are already seeing moving into the sector.
Felix, I'll just sort of add another dimension to this because you've raised funds outside India. I believe it's with angels, with funds, etc., that you've raised these funds from. What do you think would have been different had you raised the money with the government sector? Did you not try it, or was it a conscious choice? What is your perspective on this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we ever looked at raising money from the government, at least in the U.S. You know, they have something called SBA. It's about 1,000 pages, and you have to figure out how to fill it out. You know, but I do think there are some good examples on how the government can create funds, like the central bank in Lebanon has a $400 million fund to basically invest into startups, and they cultivate the region into entrepreneurship and so on. You have things like in Chile where they have Startup Chile, and they're incubating startups there, seeding $50,000, $100,000 companies. You have other things like in Mexico and things like that. Specifically to the US, I can't speak to India. I think they've done a very poor job in creating a vehicle to invest in entrepreneurs that may not have access to capital. You know, it's an unspoken rule in venture capital, but unless you go to Stanford, Harvard, or Yale, you don't fit the algorithm and you can't raise venture money. So where do those kids go to raise capital? They have to go raise capital and oftentimes don't have access to capital. So the US recently created a startup legislation where angel investors do not need to be accredited to a certain level. So typically if you were accredited, you would have about $250,000 cash net worth to some level. So you know, that to a degree has helped these entrepreneurs raise capital from families or their own family. I think that, you know, as an entrepreneur, our job is to push the limit and let government react to that limit. So things like, you know, Uber, for example, yesterday you heard them talking and you saw the Taxi Limousine Commission and the unions. I think when you think about government, you also have to take into account the unions, and especially in education. In my opinion, I think they've done a good job, you know, in the 60s and 70s, but, you know, we're in 2016 and we're still having kids in the same neighborhoods that are still living in the same projects for 5 years in a row.
Sure.
And so, you know, I think that being an enabler, as government should be, and creating programs that can invest in these communities and these kids can create economic growth and prosperity for these families and these kids, and therefore reduce income inequality, which is at the end of the day what we're all trying to do.
Sure. Thanks. I'll ask one quick question from all the speakers here on the panel. As a leader, what is your one wish from the government, also because we're approaching the budget session now? What is your one wish from the government, especially from a skill development perspective, that you'd ask them or you would be very glad about if it is incorporated in the upcoming budget? Specifically just one.
I think incorporation of technology in skill development, I think it's still lacking quite a bit from the government side. So that would be my one wish.
Sure. You?
I'll add to what was just said. I think the government needs to be very active in growth of the individual, besides just the education system, but the general learning process. I think coaching is very important. Mentorship is very important. I think that's a big deficit in India, South Pacific. A coach should have a coach. His coach should have a coach, and that's the cycle of life. So I don't know how that could be a government-driven motive, but somehow, somewhere, I guess we'll figure it out.
Sure. Personally, my wish from the government in the upcoming budget, especially with respect to the skill development sector, would be a more comprehensive policy, wherein a collaborative approach, or maybe a PPP-led model, is encouraged by the government, especially towards the skill development center. A lot of talk is done around opening different schools. A lot of budgets are disbursed towards allocation of so-and-so skill sets. But ultimately, a comprehensive umbrella vision from the government and a network which brings together entrepreneurs, which brings together investors, as well as academicians and the government bureaucrats on a single platform to think about solving the problem of skills, is something that is my golden wish from the government. Prachi, what about you?
I already made a list of many, but I would say if I were to pick one, I would think, strengthening of sector skill councils and, giving states almost a mandate and providing them the capacity building support to be able to run them efficiently and start setting very high benchmarks, monitorable, measurable, and implemented benchmarks for what quality in different sector means will be one thing which can be direction setting for the sector.
Felix, you are an outsider to India, but is there any thought yet on what you would want from the government?
Yeah, I mean, accountability. You know, I
Okay.
think that not just the government, but the companies should be held accountable on streamlining skill sets.
Sure.
So that's what I would say.
Great. One last question to all of us, as a speaker said before the audience starts asking question. If I were to ask you as the leader of your organization to pitch your organization, because this is also the forum for you to introduce yourself and let others know. So what would be your single line pitch in half a minute for the audience to know you so that you can have a great coffee dinner with them after this?
So we are in the business of providing information services, which is kind of, we work with doctors, lawyers, chartered accountant. So we are in the business of providing expertise to experts. So come and meet me in coffee.
Sure. Okay.
Let me take care of your people so you can focus on profits. That's simple.
Great. My one-line pitch is simple. I represent Online Tayari. Help me in any way so that I may be able to in turn train so many people across India. I'm looking at building partnerships and ecosystems. I'm very happy to talk to all the bureaucrats here. I'm happy to talk to all the investors. Welcome. I'll be staying over till dinner. We'll be happy to talk to everyone.
Anyone who's looking to transform the world, and the world which is very skewed for a marginalized section of the society is the type of entrepreneur or bureaucrat, that we are looking at, or co-funder. So, if you're interested in making the world a fundamentally different one for the marginalized section of the society, that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, and if you want to use data to recruit human capital, we're here and open for business.